This is Tyler, your antisocial critic and the host of the AntiSocial Network, your number one source for anachronistic conversations online. Come join us each week to hear opinions from some of the best voices discussing entertainment, politics, religion, and modern life on the internet today, most of which you've never heard of, but I have. Joining us this week is my former professor at Tribeca Flashpoint College. Jeff Kliment is a sound designer who taught me for 2 years, and I believe he's still is it Tribeca now, or is it Columbia College officially?
Well, the full name of the school is Flashpoint Chicago, so we're still called Flashpoint. We're no longer affiliated with Tribeca, so that was a good partnership while it lasted, but we're no longer associated with Tribeca. So it's Flashpoint Chicago, a campus of Columbia College Hollywood. So we're like a satellite campus for Columbia College Hollywood, not to be confused with Columbia College Chicago, which is a different entity altogether.
Sure. Did you guys? I heard you guys moved campus too. Where are you guys at now?
We did. We have a new partnership with Roosevelt University on Michigan Avenue, and we have moved our campus. Yes, we're no longer on Clark Street. This happened just this year, so I haven't actually been to the new campus yet because of the whole lockdown situation. But it's a very exciting partnership, yeah, because we're going to have new facilities, and we're going to, which is fine. I mean, our facilities on Clark Street were great, so hopefully we'll have another nice setup at Roosevelt, which we're planning right now. But the more exciting part of it is that we're going to be sharing curriculum, and so Roosevelt students will be able to take Flashpoint courses, and Flashpoint students will be able to take Roosevelt courses, particularly their huge selection of humanities and general ed classes, right? And so it's going to really open up a lot of possibilities for Flashpoint students. And Roosevelt University does not have the programs that we do, film, recording arts, interactive media, and so forth, right? So it's a really nice partnership, and we're pretty excited about it. It's brand new. We just signed on last year, 2020. It was in development, so sort of mid-year we finalized everything. I'm slated to go there next week. I have a meeting about it tomorrow, which is why it's on my brain. Next week I'm going to go in and put some finishing touches on the new mini suites over there. So we will have mini suites the same as we did at Clark Street, and there's the same number of them. We're going to have 4, and those are pretty much ready. They're going to be pretty cool. They're actually a little bit bigger than the ones we had before, and we have the tech setup is almost done. I'm going to hopefully get them up and running next week. Yet to be built out are the recording studios and post-production studios, but we are planning to have those as well eventually. We're probably at least a year off before that happens.
How are the students handling the remote stuff then, with everything going on right now?
Actually, surprisingly well. I was. Like we all were, really, at first. It's been about a year now, so I'm currently in my 4th term online. Okay, so I did 3 terms last year, and now this is the spring term of 2021. So going into it, we just didn't know, right? We didn't know how it was going to play out. But I give our students a lot of credit because they really rallied. And as it turns out, I got to tell you, Tyler, as it turns out, we can do way more online than I thought we could. I was thinking, if you had asked me before all of this, like, oh, what courses do you think you could do online? I would have answered, well, probably not that many, right? But it turns out that we can do pretty much all of our courses online in some form. I'm not saying it's the same, and I'm not saying it's as good necessarily, but we can do it. We can do the courses. We can have a good experience online. It's much less kind of limiting than I thought it would be. We actually can accomplish a lot in all of our courses. The only thing we really don't have online is, that in-person access to the studios, which is a big deal. But now, starting last term and definitely this term and going forward, we're doing these hybrid classes for the studio courses. So studio recording and live sound and those kinds of courses that absolutely need some kind of physical space. We're doing that. We're doing a mix of online and on ground. So for me and the students, again, I'm not saying it's ideal, but to get us through this pandemic period where, we had to shelter at home and things like that, it worked out far better than I would have ever imagined. And that's largely due to the students being so flexible. We didn't lose any students through this. Maybe a small handful, like, maybe you could count them on one hand, the number of recording arts students that decided to just wait it out until they could come back on ground. But the overwhelming majority of recording arts students, and film students too, by the way, because I teach film classes as well, they decided to stick it out and finish their degrees. And so we really didn't lose very many students compared to a lot of schools. And I think that's if you think about it, it sort of makes sense, because Flashpoint students are very technology savvy. They're not daunted by like the idea of doing something on Zoom or having to just do things remotely. And you can do so much with your laptop these days that it's not a deal breaker, right? Now we have had to accommodate students with computers in some cases, right? Like students that would have used our DAW lab, for instance, to do their Pro Tools sessions. We've implemented a Pro Tool, a laptop lending system, with giving them machines with Pro Tools installed and so forth for those students who need that, right? So we've had to make a few adjustments, but again, no deal breakers. We've definitely made it work.
That's incredible. I mean, I've heard different things from different people. I mean, obviously, certain levels of education need more of that in-person touch, but I'm really glad to hear that things are still moving pretty swift, all things considered. So, yeah. And I specifically I wanted to have you on because one of my favorite things about Tribeca when I was there was the fact that all the professors kind of have this rich history of being able to come from the industry and have all these amazing stories. And you're one of my favorites in that regard because you got to work at LucasArts. So I always loved hearing your stories of being able to work on all these classic Star Wars games and Grim Fandango. So I was hoping you might elucidate your history with that a little bit.
Well, that's pretty open-ended, but I'll
sure.
I'll say that I was at LucasArts for 8 years, so that's a fairly long time. I wasn't like a lifer, but 8 years is a good chunk of time. And prior to that, I had a lot of studio experience. I had a lot of experience with music recording and production, and also film post-production in particular. And those skills served me very well at LucasArts. I mean, that's why I got the job, basically. It certainly wasn't because I had experience with game sound, because I had none. And at the time that I started at LucasArts, really very, very few people on the earth had experience doing game sound, because personal computers were brand new. And the the early version of game sound was, this chip-based sound, like you'd hear in, on a Pac-Man game, on a console or something like that, right? So very rudimentary synthesized sounds. But when computers started to get more powerful, and you could actually do things with sound on a personal computer, that's right about the time that I started at LucasArts. So I started there in '96. And is that right? Yes, '96. And so it was the very beginning of the era of digital audio in game sound. Okay, so where it wasn't just synthesized sound; it was actual digital audio production, and it was the early days of that. So nobody really had experience with that. And so they hired me because they knew I was a good sound designer, because I had done a lot of sound design for other media, right? Especially for film. So they knew I had sound design skills. And I was personally very interested in interactivity, because to me, the thing that made computers interesting as far as audio goes is not that you could do the same old thing, only do it in digital. That digital allowed us to do new things that were not possible in the analog world, and that was what really interested me. So LucasArts was the perfect opportunity, because they were always pushing the envelope in terms of what their platforms could do, with sound and with visuals as well. To tell these interactive stories. I mean, LucasArts was known for their adventure games back in the day, these very complex sort of puzzle-solving adventures. And I loved the idea of interactivity, doing audio that would respond to what the players do, right? So that was, I thought that was very cool. So I started with small projects. I started with a couple of games that were for handheld platforms. I did a game called Yoda Stories, which was a very basic game, but it was totally fun to do. And actually, some of those really simple sounds for the handheld devices were the most challenging. They were actually the hardest to do, because they had to serve a very specific function in the game. They had to provide feedback, like when you press a button, you have to hear something, right? And if a character does a move or whatever, so the sounds were very specific, and those handheld devices did not, like the Game Boys and things like that, right? So those devices did not have a ton of memory and system resources available for sound. So the sounds had to be still sort of low res and so forth. So that was an interesting way for me to learn, to kind of learn the ropes and figure out this this interactive sound thing. But very soon after that, I was put onto larger projects, and the one of the biggest ones that LucasArts ever tried was a game called Grim Fandango. And so this was a very complex puzzle game. Again, it was an adventure game, initially done for the PC platform. It was a PC game, but it was ported later on to other platforms. And I was assigned the role of lead sound designer for Grim Fandango. So I worked with Tim Schafer, who was the project director and primary writer for the game, and a host of really super talented people. I had a crew of several sound designers working with me, who I supervised as audio lead on the project. I supervised their work. So the Grim Fandango, if you're familiar with the game, it consists of 4 large sections, right? And they were called years: year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. And you're traveling in the land of the dead, right? So the entire game takes place in the land of the dead. And so the artwork, the visual look and feel is all based on the Mexican Dia de los Muertos, right? And it has that wonderful artwork, which was super inspiring to me. And so some of the music, was in that same mode. We even brought in a mariachi band to do a couple of cues, and they were literally like a real mariachi band that played at like Fisherman's Wharf or something like that. And we brought them in to do a session. So that was fun. So it was the game consisted of these 4 levels, which were the 4 years of traveling through the land of the dead. And although I was lead sound designer, what I really wanted to do and what was sort of needed was for me to work with the composer, Peter McConnell, and do all the music recording and editing with Peter. So what I did was I did the sound design for the first level for year 1. I did that all myself. I did the sound design and kind of set the template for how the game was going to sound. And then we hired a couple of other folks to do the remaining 3 levels, right? And I would just sort of oversee their work, right, based on the first level that I did. And I worked very closely with them, but my main day-to-day focus was working with Peter McConnell on the music score for that game. And Peter's amazing. He's a great composer, and he brought in some of the top players in the Bay Area. I mean, we recorded some amazing jazz music for that game, and he brought in some really top-notch players. And I knew a lot of people back from my days at Russian Hill Recording in San Francisco. I knew a lot of players too, and so I brought in some folks who I knew, and between the two of us, we assembled a really killer roster of musicians to score the game. So the sessions were super fun, and it was a variety of music and so forth. So I spent a lot of time working on the music and doing all the mixing of the music and so forth with Peter, and then kind of oversaw the sound design, concurrently with that. So it was a very big production for LucasArts. It was, from a sound perspective, it was the most complex game that had ever been done by any company to that point, right? So we were trying to do things that had not been done before. And the other thing that we had to deal with, which was simultaneously really interesting but also super challenging, was their interactive music system, which was called iMuse. And iMuse was way ahead of its time as an interactive music system, and it was the main sound engine for the game. However, it was rather temperamental. It was all homegrown in-house, and it was quirky, and you had to kind of know the ins and outs of how to make it work. But we did, and Peter was one of the people who designed the iMuse system along with Michael Land. And they both were there, so anytime we had a question, we could just ask them. So using the iMuse system was a challenge for me. That was a really fun challenge because I'd never done it before. And working with the two masters, Mike and Peter, who designed the system, was amazing because they taught me just so much about how to do interactive audio. So that was a super amazing experience. So that was a technical challenge. And the other thing I did that had never been done before, and in fact, I kind of upset the programmers because they kept telling me I couldn't do it, was I wanted to do in-game processing. I wanted to be able to add effects like reverb and delay to the voice lines in the game, because there was a lot of voice in the game. And there were a lot of voice lines in that game, and I forget how many, but it was a very large number of voice files. And a lot of these lines were spoken in strange locations, including like underwater, like people could talk underwater. And so I wanted that underwater burbly sound, but I didn't want to have to create a whole duplicate set of voice files that were pre-processed because that would take up too much storage space. So rather than take up all this extra storage, I decided to take up more CPU time instead, which the programmers were not happy about, and they kept telling me, you can't do this, you can't do this, you got to make it smaller, you got to make it smaller. So we developed, and I cannot remember the guy's name. He was this young man in Oregon, and I never met him, and that's why I can't remember his name. We never met each other, but we corresponded by email. And he developed what was essentially a plugin for the reverb in the game. It was like just a little mini plugin, like you would have in Pro Tools or something like that. So he developed a plugin that had a very small footprint. So the reverb was not complex at all. It was a very rudimentary, not very good sounding reverb, but it was still a reverb and it got the job done. We could do like little flangey kind of effect with it. It had a little bit of a delay that I could mess with, and a little bit of very short reverb, nothing fancy at all. But it got the job done. And I kept emailing him back like, I need it smaller. You got to make it smaller. You got to make it smaller. And he did. And he kept tweaking the program, and he developed this plugin. It was so small that he could email me the code. Okay, think about this. This is like 1998. When email was not like it is today. Email couldn't handle really huge files, but he would email me these updates. In any case, long story short, we got the little reverb plugin working, and that game shipped with in-game processing, and it was the first of its kind to do that. So we really broke some new ground with Grim Fandango, and plus it was just it was a great game. It was fun to play. It looked fantastic. The writing was excellent. Tim Schafer's hilarious. The dialogue was really good. So that was my first, really big challenge at LucasArts, and it took a long time, and it took longer than it should have. Senior management was not happy with the development team. Not just sound, the whole thing took longer. It was the whole team. Tim was a bit of a perfectionist. He had this vision, and he stuck to his guns, and you can debate whether that was a smart thing to do, but in the end, he wound up with a game that was really cool. And a lot of people consider it a classic. So it was such a great learning process for me.
What were your interactions with Ben Burtt like, working with, since I know he was over doing the film side of things, but how much did he have oversight at LucasArts?
Well, he had no oversight at LucasArts. So Lucasfilm was the film division, and sort of the parent organization, and LucasArts was the games division, right? So we had a completely independent staff at LucasArts, and my interactions with Ben were really around this one particular project, which is the Star Wars Episode 1 racing game.
Yes.
So this was maybe a year and a half or so after Grim Fandango shipped. So the way it worked was this. It was, first of all, Episode 1, if you remember, was the first of the prequels to come out, right? So the first three films actually started with Episode 4, right? So it's Episode 4, 5, and 6, and then there was a long gap, and we had no Star Wars films, and then Lucasfilm, George decided, okay, we're going to do this Episode 1 project, okay, and I use the word project because it was conceived from the beginning as a full-on multimedia blitz, right? So the film was the anchor, right? So the Episode 1 movie, But at the same time, we were doing this episode 1 racing game in the games division, and there was all sorts of merchandise that went along with it as well, all the figures and the action figures and so forth and so on. So this was a multi-pronged, media event that was many years in the planning. And so I was assigned as lead sound designer for the racing game. And so your question is, what was my interaction with Ben Burtt? Well, obviously Ben was the lead sound designer for the movie, and so I had to be in tune with what he was doing sonically for the film, particularly with the sound of the pod racers, because we were creating a game that was based on these vehicles that you see in the film, right? And so we took one little piece of the film, the pod racer, and created a game around it, right? And so it was like a subset of the movie world. But we also developed characters that were, you may have seen a character as like an incidental, player in the film, and we would create a full-on character and base a new game on this character, right? So there were a number of Star Wars games, not just the racer game, but there were other games developed around the movies that took bits of the story in the movie and expanded on them. Okay, so the racing game was really the first one of those. I was on the project kind of early on, just in the sort of pre-production phase when they were developing the film and the characters. We knew it was going to be a racing game. We knew that it was, in terms of gameplay, it was very straightforward. It was just a racer game, and that's why it was called Episode 1 Racer. So our challenge was to make that, look and feel interesting, right? And as the sound designer, I had to create a compelling, soundscape for the racing game. So my challenges were different than Ben's, okay? So Ben Burtt was working on the film, which of course is a linear platform, linear media, right? So, film, you have a scene, and you score just that scene, you go to the next scene, you score that scene, and so forth and so on. So Ben's job was to design each of the scenes in the film, to maximum effect, right? My job was different. My job was to take the pod racers and make them interactive, so that when the player, a game player, is racing a pod, right? A pod racer, they hear the sound continuously, right? And so I would take sounds that you may have heard for just a few seconds in the film, right? And I had to make those loopable sounds that could play indefinitely and that could respond to input from the players. In other words, when you accelerate or slow down, the sounds had to respond to that, right? So I had to create these interactive sound loops based on elements that Ben was using for his pod sounds in the film, because they still had to sound believable as these pod racers, and they had to kind of match what you heard in the film. However, my sound design was much different than Ben's, because I had to deal with the interactive aspect of the gameplay, right? So the way it worked is this. So periodically, I would visit Ben in his office and just kind of check in with them, say, and how you doing? Do you have some new pod sounds? What's your latest thinking on the sound of the pods? Because he's always changing his mind and trying to develop new ideas and stuff. So it was always a moving target with Ben, because he loved to experiment, and he was kind of tweaking these sounds as he went along. And so he would give me these big data dumps, right? He'd give me just a whole hard drive's worth of files, right? And say, and we would have a brief discussion, and he would say, okay, this is what I'm doing with these this pod here. These are the ingredients that I'm using, and so I would have to kind of deconstruct and reconstruct his overall sounds in a way that I could use them as looping files, playing nonstop in the game, right? And so I had to sort of recreate from his recipe, so to speak, right? His sonic recipe. I had to recreate the sound of the pods. Super fun challenge because, how cool is that? I got to see how, Ben Bird, the master, right? I got to see how he thought about, these sounds, right? And just kind of his process, which was, to me as a sound designer, was just amazing. And then try to recreate that for this new platform of an interactive game. So it was a really, really fun challenge. So, we would check in with each other periodically, and I would just basically try to keep up with what he was doing in the film and make the game sound as close to that as I could, but also adding maybe my own touches based on, acceleration or deceleration or braking or, whatever I needed to do in the gameplay. So they were a little different than the cuts for the movie, but I tried to remain faithful to his template, so to speak, right? But he didn't really. He was so consumed by what he was doing for the movie, he didn't have time to think about what I was doing. He really didn't. He was like, here's my sounds, good luck to you. and he sort of, I'd say, okay, cool, I'll catch up with you later. And there was one time, and you probably heard me tell this story in class because I say it all the time, where we had to do this video, a promotional video for the game. This was when it was pretty far along in development, and they were starting to promote it, with advertising. And so they wanted to post this video online to promote the racing game. So the video guys gave me what we call a cutscene, which is like a little mini movie that you play in the game. They gave me a cutscene and they said, "Here, we need this scored, in a week. Give us a sound design and get this back to us by next week." Okay, no problem. So I spent a week working on the sound design for this little promo video. It was just a couple minutes long. But it took me, a whole week to score the video. And this was much like scoring a film because it is a short film. A cutscene is just a short film, and it's sort of this promotional video. So on Friday of that week, I'll always remember this. On Friday of that week, I went up to the ranch and because LucasArts was in a separate complex. We were not located on the ranch. We were near there, but in a separate sort of a generic office complex, really, off of Highway 101. But it was a short drive to the ranch, and so I went up there and showed Ben what I was doing, because I wanted to make sure that we were on the same page, and he kind of smiled, and I was thinking to myself, oh no, he hates it. But that's not why he was laughing. He said, "I hate to break it to you, but the pods don't sound like that anymore." And so I said, "Okay, so can you show me how they sound now?" And so we sat down for a few minutes, and he showed me the new direction, and he really had changed the sound of them a lot. He said, "Okay, I just sort of was thinking about this, and I wanted them to sound different." And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I still need to get this video to the marketing folks by Monday, right? And it's Friday afternoon now. So Ben gives me a whole boatload of new sounds. We talked about his approach, and I had to go back to my office then, and I literally slept in my office for the entire weekend, and I redid everything for the video, and I did get it to the marketing people on time on Monday morning, but I had to recut the whole thing to match the new sounds. So, we just had to deal with stuff like that. It wasn't, it wasn't a big deal in a way. It's just that it was a time crunch. I had to sleep on the couch outside my office in order to get it done. But that's sort of par for the course when you're working in that industry. It is deadline driven, and the thing about like Grim Fandango. Okay, here's a contrast, right? Grim Fandango, they just busted through the schedule. Okay, they were like, okay, they didn't meet the first deadline, they didn't meet the second deadline, etc. Right? We did not have that option for the racing game, because the racing game, it was non-negotiable. The game had to be on store shelves when the movie premiered. Like I said earlier, it was this multimedia kind of an effort. And so when the film hit the theaters, the game had to be ready for people to buy. Okay, so we didn't have the luxury of busting a deadline. That game had to ship on time, or else. And so we did. It shipped on time, and we got it done for sure. But it took a lot of hours to make that happen. So honestly, that was, Ben and I would see each other occasionally at company functions. There were Christmas parties and things like that. But I didn't have too much interaction with him outside of that one project, because we were both working on different aspects of it at that time. There were some other folks at Lucasfilm who I actually had more interactions with. Leslie Ann Jones, who at that time was running the scoring stage. I believe now she runs the whole operation at Skywalker Sound. I know she was doing so for a while. And Gary Rydstrom. Now, Gary was different than Ben. Gary Rydstrom was really interested in what we were doing in the game division. Like, he wanted to know, like, what's up with you guys? What do how do you do stuff? So he was super curious. We never worked on any projects together, but we had lunch a couple of times, and he would sort of pick my brain, and all of us in the sound department. He would ask us what we were doing, and he was very interested. And that relationship turned out to be really beneficial, because I floated the idea of collaborating with Skywalker Sound on a regular basis, right? Because they had these great studios, right? And we did a lot of music scoring, right? So why not use Skywalker's stage, So that's one thing. So after Episode 1 Racer, I forget, that was 2001, if I'm not mistaken. Right, I think the film debuted in 2001.
I think it was 99.
Was it 99? You might be right, Tyler. I don't remember.
I'm unnaturally good at remembering film dates, so I'm sorry if I'm correct.
No. You might be right. I knew it was right around the turn of the century there. And so anyway, the point that I was going to make is, right after that project shipped, my direct boss, Michael Land, who was running the sound department, he left the company and decided to do his own independent thing. And so I was promoted to department manager at that time. And that was in 2000, that I know, because I was department head for 4 years. And so I believe you're right then, because it would have been after Episode 1, so it was 2000. So as department manager, one of my goals for the game division was to forge a stronger alliance and a more productive working relationship with Skywalker Sound. And so, building these relationships, especially with Leslie and guys like, Gary Rydstrom, that was the way to do it. So we were very successful, and I ended up opening a little interactive audio division right at Skywalker Sound and staffing it with some of our people from LucasArts. So I was really proud of that, because it made for much more collaboration between these two divisions, right? And that's been carried through, to the present day. I mean, Lucasfilm is sort of a different organization now. They're with Disney and so forth, but that mindset of having one big family instead of separate divisions doing things, was really important, and of course everybody embraced that, so it wasn't a tough sell. It's just that we had to make it happen.
Did you ever get to meet the top brass at Lucasfilm, or did like Kathleen Kennedy or George Lucas, or?
George only in passing at company functions. He was a pretty private guy. He didn't he didn't go around and talk to all the troops, like some company heads do. He was somewhat, I found him somewhat introverted, and he tended to stick with a small handful of people around him. I was never offended by that or anything. That's just how he was. But sure, I knew a lot of the senior management at Lucasfilm. Some of them I had known for quite a long time, actually, because when I was working at Russian Hill Recording for many years before I started working at LucasArts, we collaborated with Lucasfilm and did a lot of ADR sessions, dialogue recording, and Foley sessions and sound design for film projects that Lucasfilm was working on. So I got to know those people really before I started working at the games division. And so naturally, sure, I did know some of them. I would say not all of them by any means, but it was a reasonably small organization. I mean, you'd be surprised there weren't that many administrative people. The offices were small. It was a sort of a modest setup. You'd be surprised when you walked around the facility. It's like there weren't that many people there. It wasn't this huge organization. So sure, I knew people by name, and we recognized each other and so forth. And some I had closer relationships with than others, just like you would expect.
I know that the temperament of Lucasfilm specifically was always that it wanted to be kind of an independent film studio functioning as a blockbuster studio, so that makes a lot of sense. Right.
It was a tight organization, right, and it was amazing. I mean, it was amazing, and we never took that for granted. I mean, the facilities were, the ultimate facilities. You couldn't, it was the best of the best, right? And so we knew that, everybody who worked there understood that, and there was just a culture of excellence, and we all pushed each other to make our work as good as it could be, right? So it was a really fantastic environment to work in, I consider myself really fortunate to have worked with some incredible, really talented people.
I recall one story. I don't remember if it was you who said it, and this is a bit of a tangent. Was it you or someone else at Tribeca who got to walk in on Walter Murch editing Apocalypse Now?
I did that as a student. You heard that from me.
Okay, I thought it was you, but I wanted to bring that up as the last thing before we kind of wrapped up. So
yeah, so that was in my student days at San Francisco State University. I was in a recording program at SF State, not unlike the recording arts program at Flashpoint. It was a lot of work in the studio, a lot of hands-on. It was all analog, of course, back in the day. And we took, this was a long time ago, Tyler, so I want to say it was I know I took a film sound class. And I think this field trip was with that class. It was with the film sound class, which was a small group. It was maybe 10 students, okay, not a huge group. And the field trip was to the Zoetrope Studios, American Zoetrope, in North Beach in San Francisco. And this is when they still had a mixing studio at Zoetrope Studios. So they took the students to the studio, and unbeknownst to me, I was still pretty young. Unbeknownst to me, here was this guy Walter Murch, you're working with a few other people, doing sound design for this new movie called Apocalypse Now, and the studio was incredible. It was a small-ish room, a theater kind of a room, small theater. Imagine it sat maybe 50 people or 60 people, something like that. Not so, very intimate. The room was designed by Jeff Cooper, who also designed the rooms at Russian Hill Recording, so I was sort of familiar with his work. And Jeff Cooper liked to work with, really high-end materials. So the walls were like black velvet, and the chairs were this really gorgeous, like gray velour kind of fabric, and with oak trim and brass fixtures, brass light fixtures. A very classy looking room. It was really nice. And in the middle of that room, in the middle of the seating area, what would be the seating area, was this huge 3-angled console where three engineers were sitting doing the sound design. So it was this enormous console with like a center section and then 2 wings. And I was, of course, in awe because, my jaw dropped when I saw this room and I saw these people working behind this amazing console. And the projection was a 70 millimeter work print. And that was the first time I had ever seen a 70 millimeter reel of film. And if you've ever seen one, the frames are huge. They're like postcards almost. They're enormous. So they had these big, giant reels of film that were projected. Now, this was a work print, so it was a black and white print that they were showing. And what they were working on during the few minutes we were there, we were in the control room where they were mixing for maybe a half hour. It was not a long time. And what they were working on was one of the jungle scenes in Apocalypse Now, right? And they were panning the mosquitoes around the room because it was a surround sound mix, right?
Yeah.
So there was a surround sound mix, and what they were working on just at that moment that we were there was the panning of the mosquitoes, around the soundscape. So that just cracked me up when I saw that, and also it was an eye opener to see that level of detail that was involved in the sound design for this film. I mean, that was amazing to me. It's like, holy cow. And at that point in time, I didn't really know or who these people were and how fortunate I was to be in that room right at that time. But I quickly realized that this was pretty big. And of course, we all knew who Francis was, and so we knew it was something special for sure. But to see these guys at work was amazing for a young recording arts student, like myself. And so, that really made an impression. And later I got to work at Russian Hill Recording in studios that were designed by the same designer, Jeff Cooper. So how lucky am I? It was amazing, right? And so it's, my recipe, or if there's any reason that I've been as successful as I have been, is because I've made the right friends and the right connections along the way. And it's partly dumb luck for sure, but also partly, I think, and probably more so, I have a good sense of who I want to associate with and where the opportunities may be. So if I have any skill at all, it's the skill of being able to recognize an interesting opportunity that's going to maybe take me somewhere that I want to go, right? I may not know where that is or how it's going to end up. In fact, I almost never know that. But what I do know is that here is a path that looks really interesting, and here's a really cool person that I'd like to know, right? And I'd like to work with maybe, right? And those are the kinds of decisions that I've made that have led me along my path, as an audio person and a sound designer and so forth. And that includes education as well. I've met the right people who turned out to be really good mentors to me as a new teacher, and guided me and helped me along the way. I mean, I met a lot of people when I first got interested in teaching. And so if you kind of point yourself in a certain direction, and you're open to it, the right doors will definitely open. You just have to recognize that when it happens. That's the trick.
Sure. Well, I'm actually meeting up with another Tribeca alum in about 10 minutes, so I got to kind of cut off here, but I appreciate being able to talk with you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it has. Well, good luck. Nice to see you again. Who are you talking to? Who else from Flashpoint?
I don't know. He was in the music track while I was doing the film track.
Okay. All right. Excellent. We'll say hello to and let me know how this turns out, okay?
Sure. It'll probably be up in about a week or so, but I thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate talking with you.
Awesome. My pleasure.
Have a good day.
All right, you too.
The AntiSocial Network is a Groupthink Productions podcast. Editing, producing, and hosting are by Tyler Hummel, artwork by Crystal Cowley, and original music was composed by Melissa LaFira and the late Dan Smolla. Like, subscribe, and please let us know what you think about the show in the comments below if you'd like to see anyone interesting be a guest on the show. Thank you for listening.